Welcome on board the RichPlanet starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this is Ulysses. Last year I interviewed Ben Emlyn Jones, who mentioned a document called Silent Weapons for a Quiet War. This document was allegedly found in 1979 in the possession of naval intelligence, and it is claimed that the doctrine outlined in the document was adopted by the policy committee of the secret Bilderberg Group. For those who don't know what the Bilderberg Group is, it's a secret group which meets every year in Europe or America and contains a handful of top politicians, media moguls, intelligence personnel, royalty and corporate figures from predominantly NATO countries. Notable UK members include Kenneth Clarke, Peter Mandelson and George Osborne. Some believe that this group is the real policy-making machine which steers all Western governments. The group meets in total secrecy, and the minutes from its conferences are never published for public scrutiny. You thought you lived in a democracy. Anyway, back to the document, which this group has allegedly taken guidance from. The silent weapons referred to in the document pertain mainly to techniques for controlling the masses by enslaving them economically and controlling their minds through education and the media, essentially without their knowledge. Here are some extracts from the document. In the interest of future world order, peace and tranquility, it was decided to privately wage a quiet war against the American public with an ultimate objective of permanently shifting the natural social energy or wealth of the undisciplined and irresponsible many to the hands of the self-disciplined, responsible and worthy few. In order to implement this objective, it was necessary to create, secure and apply new weapons which, as it turned out, were a class of weapons so subtle and sophisticated in their principle of operation and public appearance as to earn for themselves the name silent weapons. In conclusion, the objective of economic research as conducted by the magnates of capital banking and the industries of commodities or goods and services is the establishment of an economy which is totally predictable and manipulatable. In order to achieve a totally predictable economy, the low-class elements of the society must be brought under total control, i.e. must be housebroken, trained and assigned a yoke and long-term social duties from a very early age. In order to achieve such a conformity, the lower-class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government daycare centres for the occupationally orphaned children. The quality of education given to the lower class must be of the poorest sort, so that the meat of ignorance isolating the inferior class from the superior class is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initial handicap, even bright lower class individuals have little, if any, hope of extricating themselves from their assigned lot in life. This form of slavery is essential to maintaining some measure of social order, peace and tranquility for the ruling upper class. It makes no obvious explosive noises, causes no obvious or mental injuries, and does not obviously interfere with anyone's daily social life. Yet it makes an unmistakable noise, causes unmistakable physical and mental damage, and unmistakably interferes with social daily life, i.e. unmistakable to the trained observer, one who knows what to look for. The public might instinctively feel that something is wrong, but because of the technical nature of the silent weapon, they cannot express their feeling in a rational way, or handle the problem with intelligence. Therefore, they do not know how to cry for help, and do not know how to associate with others to defend themselves against it. When a silent weapon is applied gradually to the public adjusts and adapts to its presence and learns to tolerate its encroachment into their lives until the pressure, psychological via economic, becomes too great and they crack up. Therefore, the silent weapon is a type of biological warfare. It attacks the vitality, options and mobility of the individuals of a society by knowing, understanding, manipulating and attacking their source of natural and social energy and their physical, mental and emotional strengths and weaknesses. The document goes on to explain how one of the silent weapons which should be used is economics. The document enlightens the economy to that of an electronic circuit and explains that control of the economy and money is one of the methods used to keep the low-class elements of society under control. We are observing this today with the creating of currency as debt by central banks and people like David Cameron coming out with his classic bullshit lines like, "We need to deal with the deficit," and "We're all in this together." No, we don't need to deal with the deficit, David, and no, we aren't all in this together. We need to get rid of the Bank of England, thus allowing our government to create sovereign currency itself, instead of borrowing it at interest from the Bank of England. The current financial crisis is not an accident. It has been carefully engineered by those following the principles similar to the ones set out in this document. Some call it financial terrorism. And what does the document have to say about education? Experience has proven that the simplest method of securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of basic systems principles on the one hand, while keeping them confused, disorganized, and distracted with matters of no great importance on the other hand. This is achieved by 1. Disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activities by providing a low-quality program of public education in mathematics, logic, systems design and economics, and by discouraging technical creativity. In schools, keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law and real history. And what about television and the media? The document states control of the public is achieved by engaging their emotions, increasing their self-indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities, by unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks, mental and emotional rape, by way of constant barrage of sex, violence and wars in the media, especially the TV and the newspapers, giving them what they desire in excess, junk food for thought, and depriving them of what they really need. Rewriting history and subjecting the public to the deviant creation, thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. The general rule is that there is profit in confusion. The more confusion, the more profit. Therefore, the best approach is to create problems and then offer the solutions. In entertainment, keep the public entertainment below a 6th grade level. In the media, keep the adult public attention diverted from the real social issues and captivated by matters of no real importance. Are we not seeing this on our TV screens every day with the barrage of television shows of no real importance? For example, the plethora of dancing shows. Strictly Dancing, Ballroom Dancing, Disco Dancing, Dancing at Night, Dancing on Ice, and the soon-to-be-launched Dancing on Shite, where the contestants will hopefully fall flat on their abundantly maked-up faces. Of course, these shows are really not dancing competitions. The contestants' rippling bodies strut about, wiggling their bottoms in kinky, sexually explicit outfits, like prostitutes competing for your attention in a sleazy strip joint. Just as some of our tabloid newspapers are actually soft porn mags, thinly disguised as newspapers, these TV shows are the same. They are soft porn shows, thinly disguised as dancing competitions. In the past, I remember the show Benny Hill, which was of course soft porn, thinly disguised as a comedy show. Now, on the RichPlanet starship, we have no objection at all to anybody wishing to spend their time watching pornography. We are not prudes. We are not the modern-day version of Mary Whitehouse. Just as long as those who insist on watching this tat understand exactly what it is they are glued to and why. As my physics teacher always used to say, the easiest person in the world to fool is yourself. Then we come on to the other area of no great importance, which is paraded on our TV screens every second of the day, programs about food. I don't know about you, but I'm no more interested in watching TV shows about eating food than I am in watching TV shows about having a dump. although that probably would make a far more interesting show than the shit we are served up every day on our live boxes. As Andrew Johnson said to me the other day, the BBC, making ignorance fashionable. Well, I think I'll just remain unfashionable if it's all the same to you. Silent Weapons for a Quiet War also talks about work. In work, keep the public busy, 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 with no time to think, back on the farm with the animals. It also speaks of the artificial womb. It states, from the time a person leaves its mother's womb, its every effort is directed toward building, maintaining, and withdrawing into artificial wombs, various sorts of substitute protective devices or shells. The objective of these artificial wombs is to provide a stable environment for both stable and unstable activity, to provide a shelter for the evolutionary processes of growth and maturity, i.e. survival, to provide security for freedom, and to provide defensive protection for offensive activity. The primary reason why the individual citizens of a country create a political structure is a subconscious wish or desire to perpetuate their own dependency relationship of childhood. Simply put, they want a human god to eliminate all risk from their life, pat them on the head, kiss their bruises, put a chicken on every dinner table, clothe their bodies, tuck them in bed at night, and tell them that everything will be all right when they wake up in the morning. This public demand is incredible, so the human god, the political, meets incredibility with incredibility by promising the world and delivering nothing. So, who is the bigger liar, the public or the godfather? The public behavior is surrender born of fear, laziness and expediency. It is the basis of the welfare state as a strategic weapon useful against a disgusting public. Okay, you disgusting public. Moving on. In part 3 of today's show, I'll be talking to Scott Felton. Now, Scott and I have been involved for some time now, about the last year and a half, in producing a documentary about the Berwyn Mountain UFO incident, which occurred in 1974. And I just want to say, don't believe anything you read in the papers at this present time about that event. Now, we're not going to talk too much about the Berwyn incident in the interview because we want to keep our findings close to our chest until the documentary is produced later in 2011. And I'll be asking Scott how he first became interested in the UFO subject, because he's got quite an interesting story about that. But before that, hands up, who's heard of Phobos? And no, it's not a Greek island. Phobos is actually a moon of Mars. Now, the planet Mars has two moons, one called Phobos and one called Deimos. Now, they're both quite small. Phobos is about 15 miles in diameter, and Deimos is about 8.5 miles in diameter. And astronomers believe that these moons are actually captured asteroids. Now, there's all sorts of rumors about Phobos. One of them is that it's a secret base of some kind, perhaps an extraterrestrial base or even a base developed by the secret space program. Now, in 1988, the Soviets sent two unmanned space probes, Phobos 1 and Phobos 2, to examine and send back images of Mars and Phobos. Phobos 1 was lost on the way because of a software problem. But in 1989, Phobos 2 arrived at Mars, and it went into orbit around Mars. And it managed to send back 38 images in total. Now, some of the images of the surface of Mars, amazingly, showed a cigar-shaped shadow on the surface of Mars, and the shadow moved its position, and nobody could determine what the cause of the shadow was. Basically, it shouldn't have been there. Russia's plan with Phobos 2 was to move the Phobos probe into an orbit around Mars so that it was in a similar orbit alongside Phobos, so that it could then take images of Phobos. But as it was coming into proximity of Phobos, according to the Russians, it was mysteriously knocked out of action, and then they just lost control of it and didn't get any more images. And there was no real reason why it should have been put out of action. Now, add to this the fact that a Russian test pilot called Maria Popovich released some photographs which she alleged were taken by the Phobos 2 probe of Phobos, which presumably had been kept secret. And the photograph showed a large cigar-shaped craft. Now, a viewer has sent in a short documentary produced all about this incident with Phobos 2 and Phobos. But it was sent in on VHS tape, so we don't really know who's produced this, but I'm going to screen it after the break. Now, the quality is a little bit degraded because, as I say, it's come off a VHS tape, but it's still worth watching. So if anyone does know who has narrated and produced this piece, we'd like to know so that we can credit them, because the last part of the show was missing off the tape, so we don't know who's produced it. But fascinating nonetheless, so stay tuned for that after the break.
Some believe Mars may have been habitable as little as 10,000 years ago. In the 60s and 70s, the United States launched the Mariner and Viking spacecraft to explore Mars. In one area, called Cydonia, among other puzzling features, a stone carving was seen that looked amazingly like a human face. At other sites on Mars, features could be seen which resemble enigmatic structures on Earth. This is a feature on Mars that NASA nicknamed Inca City. Sacsayhuaman, Peru. Mars. Nazca, Peru, attributed to the gods.
I was especially intrigued by independent researchers' suggestions in their reports that the orientation of the face and adjoining pyramid indicated they were built in alignment with sunrise at solstice time on Mars about 450,000 years ago. According to my conclusions, the Anunnaki had first landed on Earth about 450,000 years ago. It was perhaps no coincidence that the two dates coincide.
The only plausible theory is that someone, neither from Earth nor Mars, capable of space travel almost 500,000 years ago, had visited this part of the solar system and had left behind monuments both on Earth and on Mars. The only beings for which evidence has been found are the Anunnaki.
The Sumerian tablets refer to the station planet Mars as the traveler's ship. I've taken it to mean that it was at Mars that the Anunnaki from Nibiru transferred to smaller spacecraft to reach Earth orbiting stations. Not once every 3,600 years, but on a more frequent schedule. The actual landing on and takeoff from Earth were performed by smaller shuttlecraft.
From some other species, from another planet.
Mars, sometime in its past, was the site of a space base. The unexplained, abrupt end of a Soviet space mission in 1989 suggests that the ancient space base has been reactivated. In October 1988, the Soviet Union sent 2 spacecraft to investigate Mars, named Phobos 1 and 2, after one of Mars' 2 moonlets. Although launched by the Soviets, the mission actually represented an international effort of an unprecedented scale, with more than 13 European countries participating officially, and British and American scientists participating personally, though with their governments' knowledge and blessings. Phobos 1 was somehow lost on its way in September 1988. But Phobos 2 did make it to Mars and operated perfectly, sending back to Earth images from the surface of Mars. On March 1, 1989, these pictures of a highly strange grid were received. The grid, here in the upper right, was shot both in the optical and in the infrared range. Later, they were merged into this composite. And here is what this amazing grid looks like once the optical image is enlarged. Then, for the next 24 days, no other pictures were released. On March 26, Phobos 2 sent back images, taken just south of the Martian equator, of this uncanny elliptical shape, aligned with this long linear strip, stretching for 300 kilometers. March 27, the Soviets announced sudden problems in keeping radio contacts with Phobos 2. March 30, the Soviet evening TV news Vremya.
Good evening. Tonight we start out with a scoop, a sensational item. News of a report by Western observers that an accident, a catastrophe, has happened to the Soviet space probe Phobos, which is part of an international program in which some 40 countries participate. But now, the facts.
This here represents a unique phenomenon. Before now, no one had ever taken such detailed infrared pictures of Mars.
What part of the planet? This one here?
Approximately, more or less in this area here, marked red. And then there is a very clearly outlined strip starting here and ending here. A strip about 20 to 25 kilometers wide, which is visible in both the optical and infrared range. These are shots taken on one and the same day.
This shadow actually appeared all of a sudden. Why am I calling it a shadow? Because you can see things through it.
So this is an object not suspended about the surface, but actually located on the surface itself?
Yes, of course.
This elliptical shadow, then, is it in Mars' atmosphere or on the planet's surface? Or is it difficult to tell?
One thing is for sure. This something is not positioned horizontally.
Well, to me it looks like a rocket taking off from the surface of Mars and leaving a trail behind. What do you think about that?
Well, if you'd want to fantasize, it could be interpreted that way too. Now we think we ought to look at the real circumstances that have caused that trail, even though they haven't yet been fully clarified. That's more likely to be the shadow of some object, since surface elements can be seen through it.
How long will it take to process all of the information to get more or less objective scientific results, rather than fantastic ones?
Come back in a week.
But 1 week later, no details. 3 weeks later, at a press conference, a scientist of the Soviet Space Research Institute offers this curious, unsolicited statement.
It does take a minimum of precision criteria to obtain on the image these spots, which some would like to call flying saucers, that appeared within the visual field of the infrared range. It must be pointed out that the flying saucer version is not ours. We'd have wanted it to all be that way. Actually, at first we were saying that there was no flying saucer, that surely all that we saw could be explained in understandable, natural and physical terms.
5 months later, in September 1989, British Channel 4 runs a news special on the Phobos mission to Mars.
Last year, the Soviets launched 2 spacecraft to the planet, both named after the Martian moon, Phobos. Their mission was to photograph Mars and land probes on its moon. One was accidentally switched off by a mission operator. But the second reached Mars and transmitted pictures that are still puzzling Soviet scientists. As it swung over the equator, it took pictures from a height of 6,000 kilometers. This is an infrared photograph. It shows differences in temperature. The dark patches are colder. This section covers 600 kilometers. It shows objects down to the size of 2 kilometers. It's the most detailed infrared picture of the planet's surface.
We have some very, very thin lines on the surface of Mars in the infrared, which means it's heat. I mean, it's not visible, it's heat. You can see it through clouds if you wanted to. These have a resolution, these have a width, I would guess, of 3 or 4 kilometers wide. Now, in answer to the question of what it is, I certainly don't know, and the Russians aren't telling us.
Scientists are also puzzled by this shadow pictured on the surface of Mars by both optical and heat-seeking cameras. They're convinced it's a shadow because they can see objects on the surface beneath. But a shadow of what? Finally, there's the mystery of the vanishing spacecraft. The Russians have yet to release the last picture transmitted by Phobos before it lost contact with ground control. But the Russians have said that it shows an object coming towards the spacecraft, an object which, in their words, should not have been there.
The spacecraft was circling Mars, coming into the same orbit as the moons of Mars. And the last picture, they got halfway through it, and they saw something there which shouldn't be there. Professor Kapitsa makes the joke that it's Martian people.
British scientists will be able to judge for themselves when the Soviets bring their pictures to a conference at Exeter next month. Because, of course, there must be a sensible explanation, mustn't there?
But the Russians brought no pictures to Exeter. So, what about the spacecraft's disappearance?
One possibility could easily be that a small meteorite, a small bit of rock, was in the same orbit as Phobos and hit it.
But in an exclusive interview with us in October 1990 in Moscow, Professor Lev Mukhin of the Soviet Space Research Institute discredited the dust theory.
There were attempts to hypothesize that there had been a collision between the space probe, which was then orbiting Mars in alignment with the orbit of Mars moonlet, and strands of dust surrounding the moon Phobos itself. But some fairly accurate computations made by several organizations and by our institute as well have shown that this assumption is totally baseless.
If not dust, then what? A long spell of silence followed until, in December 1991, former cosmonaut trainee and retired Soviet Air Force Colonel Marina Popovich held a surprise press conference at the Russian consulate in San Francisco, where she showed off this photograph reportedly taken by one of the Phobos craft. It shows in the foreground a strange shape, which Marina Popovich called an unidentified flying object, what we refer to as a UFO, clearly set off against what appears to be Mars moonlit Phobos in the background. So, what about the mysterious shadow? Well, the Russians said it turned up all of a sudden, that it was something that shouldn't have been there, a shadow of some object above the Martian surface. But that's not all. In April 1992, as we examined these other images, all taken within minutes from each other, we discovered that the shadow had actually been moving.
So the mystery remains, what caused the spacecraft to destabilize? Was it a malfunction, or was there an outside cause, perhaps an impact? The question that arises is indeed a simple one. Was the spacecraft Phobos 2 hit by something that put it out of commission? The circumstances in which Phobos 2 was lost suggest that someone might be back on Mars, someone ready to knock out what to them is an alien spacecraft.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Fascinating. Stay tuned for Scott Felton after the break. Why not join me, Richard D. Hall, live for an evening on board the Starship at the Oaken Gates Theatre in Telford, 11th of May 2011. In the show, I'll be addressing many of the areas I've covered over the past year, including false flag terrorism, UFOs, animal mutilation, the financial crisis, and more. Learn what your government isn't telling you and what your media isn't allowed to tell you. Tickets are available now from the Oaken Gates Theatre website. Further future venues include Weston-super-Mare, Leeds, Barnsley and Newcastle upon Tyne, with further venues to be arranged. Find more details on the RichPlanet.net website. Welcome back on board the Starship, and I'm joined now by Scott Felton, who is a UFO researcher, and for the last 3 or 4 years he's been looking into a very intriguing case in Wales called the Berwyn Mountain UFO case, and we've been collaborating over approximately the last year and a bit, and we've been putting together a documentary trying to find out what actually did happen in the Welsh, well, the Welsh Roswell as sometimes it is referred to. But we're not going to give too much away in this interview about the case because it's a very, we believe, a very sensitive case, and we want to hold those cards quite close to our chest and release what we have found in the documentary, which will be released later in the year. But I'd just like to ask you first, Scott, what first drew you to the UFO subject? Because you used to do a lot of hunting, and I believe it was that connection shooting that you had an experience that drew you to the UFO subject.
Well, I've always been an outdoor type. I used to do a little bit of hunting in my old days, shooting, fishing. I trained in gamekeeping when I left school. And as a consequence, I've always been outdoors. And I've spent thousands of hours, if you like, out at night with very little better to do than watch the night sky. I've seen all sorts of things flying around, mostly explainable, satellites, meteors burning up, that sort of stuff. I've always believed, because of a scientific interest, scientific background, in extraterrestrial life.
Right.
I believe the universe is brimming with it. It's spaced out. But over the years, I've come to believe that in some cases, some of this extraterrestrial life and intelligent extraterrestrial life, should we say, is a little bit closer than we might have bargained for. I'm not one of these people who go out and see things every night and it's always an ET craft. I would say I've seen very little in life that I could not explain, but I have on one occasion seen something in the 80s which really fired me up.
So this was in the mid-80s, and you were very keen on shooting ducks.
At the time.
Did you eat the ducks that you used to shoot?
Always.
Always.
No point in shooting something if you can't eat it.
All right. Well, so you weren't actually shooting ducks on this particular night, but you were doing duck reconnaissance, I believe. Tell us what that is.
I don't have the exact date because UFOs in those days didn't really mean that much to me. I just knew of things like that. But on this particular occasion, I was out a couple of weeks before, it would be before the 1st of September, the latter half of August. I was doing some reconnaissance of ducks that were flying in to particular places on the river, sewer outlets and stuff like that.
Reconnaissance,
yeah. Well, they love that sort of filth. Yeah. Basically, I was just taking notes of what times the ducks were flying in a certain state of the tide. So come the start of the shooting season a fortnight later, I'd be in position to bag myself a few. But on this particular occasion, it was just a little bit before dawn. And
this is near the Mersey?
Yeah, it was on the banks of the River Mersey.
On the banks of the Mersey.
I was walking along the promenade just before dawn. It was still dark, but you could see wading birds running along the edge of the tide, which was about 100 yards out, river channel. And I had my little dog with me, a spaniel. And
Springer Spaniel.
Yeah, a little Springer Spaniel. And she was running about, and she often used to stick her nose through the fence, and she'd sense on the wind, and she'd lift a leg up and cock her tail, pointing again if you like.
Pointing, yeah. So that's what they.
That's what they sort of did. She did it a lot, and she was quite an obedient dog. So when I'm sort of sneaking up, I need her at my side.
Yeah.
and I was calling her and she'd always come, but on this occasion she stuck her nose through the fence and she was, I don't know, transfixed, if you like.
Was this looking out onto the river?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, she was just looking out. But we were on a promenade and there's a sea wall going down, maybe 12, 15 feet down to the shingle in the mud. And on this occasion, she was there and I called her and she ignored me. I called her, she ignored me. So I went back and she was still sniffing through the fence. So I just looked over the fence, over the sea wall, and down onto the shingle. It was black with the darkness of the night, but also more particularly black in the shadow of the sea wall. And then all of a sudden, this light came on, just a few feet below me. And it, to my surprise at the time, it was just a glowing sphere, a white luminous sphere.
A white glowing sphere, all right.
Yeah, it just came on like a light bulb coming on.
Right.
So whatever it was doing before, it was doing it unilluminated.
Right. And the dog could presumably sense it?
Well, I assume it did, yeah. Whether she could hear it or smell it, or she certainly couldn't see it. Neither of us could see it because it was down below us.
Right.
But something about it, I believe, the dog picked up on.
Right.
And it caught her interest. So much
so. What sort of size are you talking about, Scott?
Well, I'm saying about this sort of big. This sort of
about
size.
The size of a football, maybe?
Well, not quite as big as a football, larger than
so
a
just a
ball.
sphere, just
yeah.
suddenly comes on.
Just a sphere, yeah. But
did it move or?
Well, not at that point, no.
Right.
Where what was interesting about it,
it was floating in midair above the water then?
It was floating, no, actually above the mud. The water
above
was,
the mud.
The tide was 100 yards away. This expanse of mud and shingle. It was low tide. And what I did notice that it was hovering.
Right. And
maybe a foot, no more than 18 inches off the mud. And I could quite clearly see from the glow of it, the luminosity, I could see the mud and the shingle underneath. That's how I knew it was hovering. It lit up the ground underneath it.
Right.
And it was very, very bright light. Well, I got the impression that its size, so I say about this big sort of thing, that was because of the light. I got the impression any density and any solidness, any object was actually a lot smaller than the middle.
So it was glowing with a kind of an aura.
Yeah, like an aura.
Right.
Yeah.
So it then moved.
Yeah, it seemed that just took a few seconds. I'm looking at it, and then it just moved off in a relatively straight line, straight out across the mud and the shingle towards the river channel.
Right.
And it kept a straight course. It still hovered above the mud, but it seemed to, like, I don't know, I give the impression it was like a mild zigzag along that straight line, or a wobble, or something like that. And I watched it, and it probably happened quite quickly, but it seemed several seconds before it reached the edge of the tide.
Yeah.
And what actually happened was all these flocks of wading birds and seagulls and things were running up and down the edge of the tide, and this light went right into the birds.
Right.
And as a result of that, all the birds erupted off with the alarm calls and sort of cacophony of sound just all over the place, panicking birds.
So that was possible confirmation that it was a real object then?
Well, yeah. It was it wasn't my imagination.
Yeah.
And at that point, this light went out, or at least disappeared. It either went out as the birds erupted around it, or it actually entered the water. And I lost sight of it that way.
So it may have gone into the water, you think, possibly?
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
All right. So that sparked your initial interest in UFOs, although it's not what you would term a classic flying saucer type UFO experience. Very intriguing nonetheless. So you then started taking UFO magazine and reading up on UFOs.
I didn't buy it every time it was out, but if I saw it on the shelf, I'd get it and I'd read.
Graham Birdsall's magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I believe you even wrote to UFO magazine and had some of your letters published.
Well, that was a much later date, more or less in the last few months of publication before he died. 2004,
2005 sort of time.
Yeah, I imagine so.
So you actually informed UFO magazine of this experience?
Yeah, I once wrote about it, yeah.
You wrote about it? Yeah. So, because I believe Graham Birdsall actually responded to what you said.
Yeah, I had a letter published, and there was a bit of a sarcastic footnote at the bottom, really. This again is demonstrating my sort of more scientific background. Right. I'm only interested in facts and getting things sorted out. I'm not interested in the ethics and morality of certain things. I just believe get the facts out and let all the rest settle down with the dust. But yeah, I'd made some reference in the letter to people going on about global conspiracies to cover up the UFO thing, and people were claiming they'd seen aliens and contacted them and were abductees and all that, and fair enough. But I was the sort of person who said, well, if it's the government covering things up, it's the responsibility of the UFO fraternity to uncover it. Right. Because you'll never get disclosure. I'd never believe disclosure will come. Right. And it was a case of saying, well, one of the things you could do is acquire your own alien or technology. Because everyone talks about meeting this stuff, but no one ever seems to actually do anything about it. So I suggest, well, what I actually said was, in relation to the sphere, was, had I been there 2 weeks later when I saw the sphere, with your gun, I'd have been armed. Right. And I'm not one of these awestruck people. It was a very curious sight what I saw. Yeah. But I didn't go, you know, and gobsmacked by it. And I'd have been 2 weeks later.
You would have shot it.
I'd have shot it.
Right. Maybe I shouldn't laugh there, but...
and Graham Birdsall didn't see, I don't think he saw the funny side of it.
And he commented, no wonder they don't reveal themselves.
That sort of thing, yeah. Right. And of course, there was also a little bit of flack about it from certain people, but thereafter, but I don't care about that. I wouldn't like to say what the outcome of such an encounter would have been, or whether it would even have been effective. But I would have given 2 battles.
Right, right.
And well, from me, my point of view, it's a case of, let's say for argument's sake, had I given 2 battles, and it was a mechanical device of some sort, because it's all technology, someone or something built it, and you were able to drop it onto the mud, I would have been in possession of perhaps extraterrestrial technology.
Yeah, I mean, this is the alleged technology that's possibly involved in making crop circles. A lot of people say that balls of light are witnessed above crop circles.
Since then, when I looked into it, I realised there was a connection.
I'm not talking about the man-made planked crop circles, because we must distinguish between the two in that case.
Yeah, it takes all sorts to make a world.
Yeah. Okay, Scott, so you claim only to have ever had this one experience. You've only seen what you would term a UFO once, and you believe that many of the worldwide UFO cases that are reported are not genuine UFOs. They're explainable in, well, you tell me what you think what UFO cases are.
Well, I've found people who are interested in UFOs just as interesting as the subject itself. Right. And because of I'm the sort of scientific person where, let's say for argument's sake, you get people like top astrophysicists who say aliens can't come here because of things like the time factor and speed of light and all that.
Yeah, they can't travel faster than the speed of light.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And on the face of it, the sums add up. It can't be. But I should really be in their camp, but I'm not, because I believe somehow, although I agree with their science as we understand it today, and we're not experts, there's plenty of stuff to be discovered yet. Yeah. Maybe these more advanced entities have actually just found a way to get around it.
Exactly. Well, as Bill Hicks once said, maybe we don't know everything.
Yeah, well, we don't know everything.
It's as simple as that, isn't it? You know.
Even our technological achievements and intelligence might be increasing exponentially all the time, but we've still got a long way to go.
And so what would you, the majority of UFO sightings, what would you put them down to then?
Misidentifications. My theory is on this is because we're apes, we're primates, and our sort of evolutionary history, as the more advanced primates, we've never had to worry about things like aerial predators. Right. And you know, a lot of lesser creatures, they spend a lot of time scanning the sky, especially if they're on the diet of things like eagles or the birds of prey, for instance. And as a consequence, a lot of animals spend a lot of time scanning the sky, looking out for predators. Well, as far as I'm aware, modern humans, and when I say that, going back sort of 200, 250,000 years, we've never had to worry about that. Yeah. As a consequence, people don't look up. Yeah. Because we're still animals at the end of the day. Although we might have a civilization built around us, we're still flesh and blood. and people don't look up. And even though there's millions of pairs of eyes all over the world, comparatively few actually look up. So when
That's why they
look
should
up,
keep their eyes on the skies.
yeah. And when they do look up, even though these things are floating about their heads every night, things like satellites, shooting stars, even things as mundane as the planet Venus hanging there in the sky, people don't notice them. And then one day they suddenly do, and they think, oh, that wasn't there yesterday, but in fact it may have been. They've just never noticed it before. It gets the curiosity, and all of a sudden what they're looking at is, well, in the case of a meteor coming in, a shooting star, it is a UFO because it's an unidentified flying object. You and I might know what it is, but they don't, so to them it's still a UFO, and they often claim it is.
But you do believe that there are some cases, for example, Bentwaters and the Berwyn case in Wales, that were genuine UFOs and possibly extraterrestrial intelligence.
Out of the thousands of, or even perhaps millions of cases that are being recorded, and people claim to have seen, a significant number are genuine cases.
You're from Liverpool originally, but you spent a lot of time living in Wales, yeah? And you speak Welsh as well. So that kind of is, again, another reason why you became interested in the Berwyn Mountain UFO case. And just because without discussing the detail of it and some of the other, there's some very intriguing facts and some very intriguing things which have happened to Scott really before he started investigating the case, as he was getting interested in it, and they're all to be revealed in our documentary. But we believe that there is various establishment disinformation being put out on this case, and we're going to cover that in the documentary. But just, you know, there are various books that have been written which have said, well, nothing happened here. And just give us a broad outline of the disinformation, Scott. You know, how extensive is it? How much effort do you think the authorities have gone to kind of cover up the Berwyn case after it had happened?
Well, it is extensive. I believe that the Berwyn case is unique. It's the most unique UFO case in Wales, if not the whole of the UK, in the sense that it's almost entirely in the public domain. If you compare it with, say, Rendlesham Forest, that particular incident was almost entirely within the military. So you've got similar cases, if you like, both being covered up, but in two different sorts of situations. As regards disinformation, even when I first started looking into the Berwyn case, there was things like, there was a guy called Arthur Adams who allegedly found some mineral with electrical qualities that could reproduce itself once it was drained. And there was stuff on the internet. Arthur Adams went to the crash site on Berwyn and things like this, and this is where he found this stuff. And it was in the Daily Express or the Sunday Express. And I looked into all this, and they were all dead ends because it was just people were just making things up.
I mean, you know, I've gained more knowledge over the last sort of 18 months in this case. It was originally Timothy Good, the famous author and ufologist. He put me on to Margaret Fry, who has been investigating this case for many, many years, a Welsh UFO researcher who you know. And like I say, we are making a film about this case, and the more I've learned about it, the more I realise that there is disinformation being put out. There are multiple stories about what happened, and I'm of the mind that that has come from very high up source, that they've been put into the on the internet and through various people to muddy the waters. And for me, that attracts me to this case, because I think, well, if they're bending over backwards to lie about it, then there's something really important about this case, and we hopefully are going to uncover new information in our upcoming documentary. But like I said, we're not going to reveal too much of it at the moment.
Well, Margaret Fry, of course, I got in touch with Margaret some years ago, and we've hit it off since then. We've collaborated, but she had a stockpile of information she collected, and she shared that information. There's another problem within ufology is some people don't share. They keep it all to themselves, and that might as well be a dead-end piece of disinformation because it's worthless. But she shared, we collaborated, and as a result of that, we made some good progress.
All right, well, we will be bringing out the Berwyn Mountain UFO film later in 2011, so keep your eye out for that. And we still have got a couple of leads and some other physical evidence that we still haven't finished with yet. So we are discovering new information all of the time. You and I, you know, we've both been down there and filmed and collected evidence and collected testimony. So it promises to be a very interesting film. So thanks very much indeed for coming in, Scott.
You're welcome.
And we are going to record another bit where we're going to talk about Berwyn, but we don't want to put that out until a later date. So thanks very much indeed for coming in. It just remains for me to say, keep your eyes on the skies, keep your feet on the ground, and tell all your friends about this show. The lower class family unit must be disintegrated by a process of increasing preoccupation of the parents and the establishment of government daycare centres for the occupationally orphaned children. The quality of education given to the lower class must be of the poorest sort, so that the meat of ignorance isolating the inferior class from the superior class is and remains incomprehensible to the inferior class. With such an initial handicap, even bright lower-class individuals have little, if any, hope of extricating themselves from their assigned lot in life. This form of slavery is essential to maintaining some measure of social order, peace, and tranquility for the ruling upper class. It makes no obvious explosive noises, causes no obvious or mental injuries, and does not obviously interfere with anyone's daily social life. Yet it makes an unmistakable noise, causes unmistakable physical and mental damage, and unmistakably interferes with social daily life, i.e., unmistakable to the trained observer, one who knows what to look for. The public might instinctively feel that something is wrong, but because of the technical nature of the silent weapon, they cannot express their feeling in a rational way, or handle the problem with intelligence. Therefore, they do not know how to cry for help, and do not know how to associate with others to defend themselves against it. When a silent weapon is applied gradually to the public adjusts and adapts to its presence and learns to tolerate its encroachment into their lives until the pressure, psychological via economic, becomes too great and they crack up. Therefore, the silent weapon is a type of biological warfare. It attacks the vitality, options, and mobility of the individuals of a society by knowing, understanding, manipulating, and attacking their source of natural and social energy and their physical, mental, and emotional strengths and weaknesses. The document goes on to explain how one of the silent weapons which should be used is economics. The document enlightens the economy to that of an electronic circuit and explains that control of the economy and money is one of the methods used to keep the low-class elements of society under control. We are observing this today with the creating of currency as debt by central banks and people like David Cameron coming out with his classic bullshit lines like, "We need to deal with the deficit," and "We're all in this together." No, we don't need to deal with the deficit, David, and no, we aren't all in this together. We need to get rid of the Bank of England, thus allowing our government to create sovereign currency itself, instead of borrowing it at interest from the Bank of England. The current financial crisis is not an accident. It has been carefully engineered by those following the principles similar to the ones set out in this document. Some call it financial terrorism. And what does the document have to say about education? Experience has proven, anyway, back to the document, which this group has allegedly taken guidance from. The silent weapons referred to in the document pertain mainly to techniques for controlling the masses by enslaving them economically and controlling their minds through education and the media, essentially without their knowledge. Here are some extracts from the document. In the interest of future world order, peace and tranquility, it was decided to privately wage a quiet war against the American public with an ultimate objective of permanently shifting the natural social energy or wealth of the undisciplined and irresponsible many to the hands of the self-disciplined, responsible and worthy few. In order to implement this objective, it was necessary to create, secure and apply new weapons which, as it turned out, were a class of weapons so subtle and sophisticated in their principle of operation and public appearance as to earn for themselves the name silent weapons. In conclusion, the objective of economic research as conducted by the magnates of capital banking and the industries of commodities or goods and services is the establishment of an economy which is totally predictable and manipulatable. In order to achieve a totally predictable economy, the low-class elements of the society must be brought under total control, i.e. must be housebroken, trained and assigned a yoke and long-term social duties from a very early age. In order to achieve such a that the simplest method of securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of basic systems principles on the one hand, while keeping them confused, disorganized and distracted with matters of no great importance on the other hand. This is achieved by 1. Disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activities by providing a low-quality program of public education in mathematics, logic, systems design and economics, and by discouraging technical creativity. In schools, keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law and real history. And what about television and the media? The document states control of the public is achieved by engaging their emotions, increasing their self-indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities, by unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks, mental and emotional rape, by way of constant barrage of sex, violence and wars in the media, especially the TV and the newspapers, giving them what they desire in excess, junk food for thought, and depriving them of what they really need. Rewriting history and subjecting the public to the deviant creation, thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. The general rule is that there is profit in confusion. The more confusion, the more profit. Therefore, the best approach is to create problems and then offer the Welcome on board the RichPlanet starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this is Ulysses. Last year I interviewed Ben Emlyn Jones, who mentioned a document called Silent Weapons for a Quiet War. This document was allegedly found in 1979 in the possession of naval intelligence, and it is claimed that the doctrine outlined in the document was adopted by the policy committee of the secret Bilderberg Group. For those who don't know what the Bilderberg Group is, it's a secret group which meets every year in Europe or America and contains a handful of top politicians, media moguls, intelligence personnel, royalty and corporate figures from predominantly NATO countries. Notable UK members include Kenneth Clarke, Peter Mandelson and George Osborne. Some believe that this group is the real policy-making machine which steers all Western governments. The group meets in total secrecy, and the minutes from its conferences are never published for public scrutiny. You thought you lived in a democracy.